Welcome to BenQ AQCOLOR's Ask the Experts live webinar. We're excited to have you all with us for this exclusive session where you'll get direct access to some of the industry's most respected creative professionals and color experts with Art, Andrew, and Colin. So this is y'all's opportunity to hear real-world tips, workflow insights, and expert advice from the pros who rely on BenQ in their daily work. So joining us today are three of our most trusted BenQ ambassadors you may all be familiar with by now. First off is Art from Art is Right. He's a professional photographer, educator, and color management expert. Also, BenQ's first global ambassador from the professional design series. He's the face behind the YouTube channel Art is Right with over 55K subscribers and 500 videos. Next up, we have Colin from Photoshop Cafe, a Photoshop trainer, photographer, Adobe community expert. List goes on and on. Creator. He's written 21 books, and his channel is about to hit 400K subscribers on YouTube. So if you're not subbed already, go help him reach that goal. And finally, Andrew, digital artist, Photoshop and Lightroom teacher, and Adobe community expert who runs one of the most active Photoshop and photography communities on Facebook, an AI art and digital art group, and Photoshop and Lightroom group with around 570,000 members between the two. So highly recommend and encourage you all to join those to get involved in these communities. So thank you all for leaving your questions ahead of time. So we'll be answering the questions you all submitted to our best ability. If you have any questions during the webinar, please don't hesitate to drop them in the chat and we will do our best to answer them. If we run out of time, no worries. I'll drop an email address for you all to send questions to afterwards, and we'll try our best to get to those and answer them to our best extent. So let's go ahead, dive in, and get started. So first question, Ted asks, when you calibrate a display and save it, does it affect or change the preset color spaces from P3 to Rec 709 to sRGB?
So I'll take that question. I want to say a quick shout out to Nanette, which is tuning in from Australia. Hello from down under, or from up north rather. Hello down under. Anyway, glad that you can join us. So to answer that question, no. So your display comes with pre-color mode or preset color mode that you can use. For example, I'm going to try to see if I can even do it on this one. These are the modes that you can go on display, and if you go into the menu, there's like different color mode. There's like users, sRGB, P3, and so forth. When you run a calibration, what you're really doing, it depends on the model, by the way. For the most part, though, you're not really changing any of these color modes. You're just applying a profile on top of it. So if you ever want to reset, you can just remove that profile and you're pretty much good to go. If you have an SW display line that have hardware calibration, you're going to be calibrating them in the user mode. And if you use Palette Master Element, or excuse me, Palette Master Ultimate with PD series, like the one that I have here, this is the 3226G, the 144 Hertz one. If you run the calibration with Palette Master Ultimate on this one, it just stores that data in user mode. So it's not really changing the factory preset colors.
Awesome. Okay, perfect. Thank you, Art. Next up, we have a question from Michael. So he has a fully calibrated BenQ monitor connected to a MacBook Pro, and no matter what he tries, his prints are always dark. Do you guys have any solutions to that?
My guess is he probably
I'll
has
have
it.
Colin, you go.
Well, he probably has it too bright. So obviously it's too bright compared to what you're printing. So what you want to do is when you calibrate, make sure you calibrate the brightness, but also, when you set up your room, like what are your lighting conditions like?
Mhm.
You want to maintain, like if you're looking behind me, there's no sun coming and everything. So this is a very controlled environment. So when I calibrate the same brightness that I'm going to be working at. Like sometimes people will calibrate it, during the day and then they're working at night, where the light changes. So that's really important. But overall, I mean, what's happening is what you're seeing is that your monitor is brighter than what your printer is set to, basically is what's happening. So what you got to do is turn your brightness down a little bit, and maintain that environment. Art, do you want to add anything there?
So I'm gonna add on exactly what Colin said, and the addendum to that would be I would look into doing the luminance range on your display when you calibrate. You can set that in all the programs, Calibrate. You can do that in Spider. If you happen to use the Spider device, you can also do that in Palette Master Ultimate. And you can set the luminance range. And what I would do is set it somewhere between 80 to 120 in about like 10 nits increments, depending on your environment. So if you're in a brighter room, 100 or 110, 120 might work better. If you're in a darker, fairly light control environment, sometime 80 or 90 works fairly well. My personal number have always been 80 nits, but one of the things I always do now when people say that to me is like my prints are brighter. I ask you the question like how bright is your display? And if you can't answer that question to me in terms of how many nits you have set up, that means you have to go back and recalibrate and set that and come up with your own personal number. So that would be my advice. Anywhere between 80 to 120 nits, that would be the number that I would use. And one more thing is that you'll probably see the term nits and candela, that's CD per meter square. They're pretty much used interchangeably. They mean exactly the same unit value.
Perfect. Thank you, guys. All right, next question from Rico. How often should you calibrate your monitors, and what's the system to use?
I'll take that one. If you have a BenQ SWPD, Palette Master Ultimate, it's going to be the best one. So I think that's the terms of like system that you're referring to. And I would probably say anywhere between like 4 to 6 or maybe like 8 weeks is a good time to come in and recalibrate things, depending on how much you use your display. If it's on, for example, like 8 hours a day, or 10 or 12 or whatever, I would probably do it like about every 4 to 6 weeks or so. That would be my advice. As far as system to use beyond just using BenQ software, there are really just two solutions out there. I have always been using X-Rite and then now Calibrite solutions because I feel like the sensors from an engineering perspective are a lot better. However, let me also be absolutely, yep, what Colin's showing right now. But let me also be absolutely clear that if you have a spider device and if it works, don't go out and buy a new one. I'm not about buying new devices just to get the new thing. If you have something and it still works, if it's compatible, use it. If you're looking to get a new one, the one that Colin just showed, the Calibrite, the HL series, there's either Display Pro or Plus HL are fantastic devices to get. And I think there might be some like sales going on too that you can check out on their website.
And
Awesome.
also this one worth mentioning too, the new one, the Display Plus HL.
Mhm.
This one works with like HDR and stuff, so it has more dynamic range than what the old ones did.
Yeah.
Cool.
So unless you're working with HDR, or you are working with you probably don't need to go out and buy this one if you're just using standard, if you already have one. But if you don't have one, I would get something like this because then it's future proof.
And I think Richie, I just put down the device name, but what I write there will only go to us. It won't go to the panelists. So you mind copying and paste that or give me the
Sure.
ability to type in the chat directly to everyone?
Of
Right.
Because I
course.
don't know.
And then what was the other name? Just the Spider Pro?
No, the other one's below it, Calibrite Display Pro HL.
Gotcha. Okay.
Those are the two devices I recommend. If you're not doing HDR like Colin said, the Pro is fine. The Plus one is, it has the HDR capability. If you want to do that, you can.
Wonderful. Excellent suggestions. Next question from Andrea. Does the BenQ calibration software Palette Master Ultimate have to run in the background on the Mac OS, or can it be turned off?
You can quit it. You don't have to. The nice thing about having it run in the background for both PD and SW is that if you change your display, for example, if you go into like a different color mode, for example, you set this to Adobe RGB and you change it to like display P3 or something. I mean, it's not on. Let me give a better example. Let's say you set this to sRGB and you change it to P3. Palette Master Ultimate will change the profile for you if you change those, especially on like an SW, changing calibration slot. It's just nice to have, but if you're just constantly editing in one color mode, you don't really need to do that, or you run a hardware calibration. Um, there's actually a question that comes in that's kind of related to this. I'm gonna take that if that's okay. Let's see here. So Cassidy is saying that new to BenQ, I got a PD3205 UA. I have no idea how to calibrate it. Just plug it in and turn on the MBook mode. That's perfectly fine too. That's absolutely okay. I would refer you to my YouTube channel. In fact, Richie, if you don't mind, put down hello@artitsright.com as an email, and I'll have him type it in the chat there. If you have any questions about, like, I have this display, I don't know how to calibrate this, send me an email and I will send you to a guide that I have on my channel on how to do specifically that. Let's see. I just purchased SW2, another one from Jay. I just purchased a new 272U. I have Palette Master installed and have about 20 hours to use the screen. I just got notice saying that 30 days have passed. I need to recalibrate. So what happened is, it might not necessarily be 30 days on your end, and that display is not used or anything like that. It has to do with the on time, and it could be the on time from the factory when they actually power on the circuit and so forth. It just counts automatically. I wouldn't worry about that. Um, let's see. You don't have to do the hardware calibration quite yet if you don't want to do so. I've never calibrated since installing. That's personally fine. You purchased a Spider X Elite but haven't used it yet. Okay. Yeah, you can keep the Spider X Elite. Is compatible. You can run the calibration when you want. The thing that you need to understand is when these displays come from the factory, they are calibrated, but they're calibrated to reference specification. The issue is that your computer, none of our computers, Andrew's, Colin computer, none of our computer, including my own, are outputting reference specification. They're going to be slightly different on every single one of the displays. And that's the reason why you want to hardware calibrate. It's not so much like, oh, I got this from the factory, it's brand new, I don't want to touch it yet. That's not quite the mentality we want to apply here. The mentality that we want here is we want to custom calibrate this right away so that it's tuned specifically for our system. That's kind of the mentality that we should apply, particularly towards hardware calibration, especially if you have the SW lineup.
Okay, and then next question from Kent. What's the best method for calibrating monitors for print?
I'll take that first and we'll throw this and we'll give this to Colin because he does a lot of printing too. So the best thing that you can do for print is I personally would say if you have an SW line, set it to Adobe RGB because that's the color space that was really formulated for CMYK print. So that's the first thing. And secondly, make sure that you have the correct display brightness, the right value range, the 80 to 120 nits. That's going to be key because if you can't nail that, right, every single thing that you're seeing, like it might look good on the display, but it prints out dark. And it really doesn't matter where you send it to print, it's always going to come out dark. So you want to make sure that you get those two variables like in line. And then from there, you're pretty much good to go. And it's just an experiment sometimes, just sending some test print over and making sure that it looks right. But those are the key variables. Colin, you have anything to add to this?
Yeah, I would agree with what you said. But one thing I would probably add is depending on how
Yeah.
you're printing. If you're printing locally and you have, like, say I have an Epson printer here, then I'm going to be using Adobe RGB because that is
Yeah.
the best profile to work with that printer in order to get accurate color. But if you were
Right.
sending it out to a service, some of the services are actually using sRGB. So it really depends. But the other thing that's important is what really matters is that all of your equipment is all on speaking the same language, is all on the same profile. So Lightroom, for example, you can set that to Adobe RGB, you can set that to ProPhoto RGB. So you don't want to have one in ProPhoto, another one in Adobe, but like your camera, for example, if you can set your camera to Adobe RGB, set Photoshop and Lightroom to Adobe RGB, set your monitor, if you have the SW, of course, set that to Adobe RGB. Now you're gonna have a nice complete loop. All your gear is all going to be at least speaking the same language. Because if you change it, sometimes you can get significant shifts. If you're opening a pro photo, have you ever done that? You're compositing in Photoshop. You take like one image in pro photo and then you drop it into another image. Suddenly the colors shift dramatically. So you want to make sure your profiles are the same. However, if you're using the PD monitors, then you might be better to be, correct me if I'm wrong, or you might be better to be working with, Well, I would still work in Adobe RGB to be honest, but the sRGB is what you're going to be seeing on that monitor because that monitor displays it. Like usually they're 99% to 100% sRGB compatible. But if you're doing a lot of digital work, then I would definitely stick to that. But if you're doing the printing, once again, if you have the printer and you have the SW series, then I would agree. I would be using Adobe RGB. I don't really use ProPhoto RGB to be honest. I mean, I
And
don't know.
and I was going to say something to speak to Colin about is the whole pro photo that is the default in Lightroom seems very unrealistic. And I've seen, seminars and webinars where they've stated, anytime if you were to try to attempt to print with pro photo, you'd be completely out of gamut. And so it really shouldn't be the default for the color profile in Lightroom. It really should be Adobe RGB 1980 because it's out of gamut. It's not realistic.
I have a thought
Um,
on that though, regarding Lightroom. I feel like my understanding and my feel for that is the reason why Adobe did that is so that at any given time, should the technology in the future
Sure.
progress enough where we can see that, it's calculating the color space in the largest space possible. But I totally agree with you that it's been what, since 2006 since Lightroom released, and we haven't got anything that goes beyond 99% Adobe RGB just yet in terms of like that color space gamut for photography. And yeah, I don't know, like we'll see where this goes. But yeah, you're absolutely correct on that one.
Yeah, and I see, and there Hannah also mentioned, don't forget the paper you're printing on. And that's
Yep.
where, the actual print profiles come in, so like when you're working with, say, like I have the Epsons, and then you download the profile. So there's a separate profile for every paper type that you're working on, and you want to make sure that you're loading that in because
Right.
that takes account for the brightness of the paper, also the softness, how much bleed you're getting in there, so that'll
Do
control like the dot gain, a lot of different things like that too. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a few questions in a pod. I like to just quickly because they're kind of related right now. It says once calibrated, do you just operate in your safe calibration mode? How do you operate in Adobe RGB, photo, and P3 for video? What you would do in that case is have Palette Master Ultimate running in the background if you have an SW, and you literally would calibrate custom slot 1 to Adobe RGB, custom or calibration slot 2 to P3, and you can set it as a shortcut on your puck so that number 1 is your calibration 1, number 2 is calibration 2, and Palette Master Ultimate will automatically change the profile for you when you switch between those two. So that would be the way how you can do that. It's a little bit more. There's a couple of other things you have to be aware of, like if you have any apps running that are color aware, Photoshop, Premiere, and all those things, you have to quit them and relaunch them because those app loads the color profile upon launch. So that's one thing to consider if you want to work in that regard. But yes, you can totally jump back and forth without any problems. Another person mentioned that Greg Benz is a huge advocate for Pro Photo RGB in most cases. I mean, here's the thing. You can use whatever color space you want. I mean, you can really use sRGB to do every single thing that you do. And there are people that have done that successfully, and that's perfectly fine.
But
You have to choose what works for you, what works for your workflow, and what you're comfortable with. I mean, the
right, but
practical.
I would add that I would imagine that Greg does not send it out to an output house. So I think he has a specific printer that he uses that he has calibrated that works with, say, ProPhoto in some way. But I doubt, I mean, the one thing I was going to bring up too that I find very strange that's happening in professional output houses is a lot of times when you call an output house to get the technical details of the best way to save your file for print, a few of them recently in the last few years have told me you can just save it as sRGB. And I'm like, what? It's like, what happened there where we've gone down to the smallest color profile for professional output? And I think it's just a kind of laziness on their part where they want just an ease of use or something. Thoughts, Colin? You look like you.
Well, I do know some services, like a lot of wedding photographers and stuff like that they ask for sRGB. Even though, yes, I agree, it's a smaller color space, but it's probably easier to manage for people that maybe are not so experienced, and that's probably why they're using the lowest common denominator is my guess. I mean, if I was
Yeah.
printing on my printer at home, I wouldn't be using sRGB because you're losing colors.
Right, but I mean that's what output houses are asking for. I'm like surprised.
Well, they're actually asking for JPEGs too. So,
Yeah,
you know,
that's right.
it's,
High res
it's-
JPEG.
that's why I
The
print my
other,
own.
yeah, the other addendum to that too is a lot of times when you send Adobe RGB, and this used to be a problem in the past where the system they're using to print does not understand it at all, where they don't set the system profile to even Adobe RGB that it can't accommodate it. So your colors is like desaturated, turning like green a little bit. I think that's part of the reason why too, but our technology have come such a long way now that that shouldn't be an issue anymore. But again, like, you know, if you're in a rush to get stuff done, do you want to risk it? You know, as
Well, you
so
know,
you
something I do want
can't.
to add, you know, to that, since we're on that topic, is, you know, talking about printing, you know, online services versus printing at home. If you have never printed yourself on a high quality inkjet printer with high quality paper, you've probably never seen a good quality print. Because like I see the stuff that they sell in stores. I've seen stuff, you know, even in art galleries, and the quality doesn't come anywhere close. You know, some of the quick output houses, like I've had stuff printed and it's too dark or the colors are gone. But when you print and everything is looking right, it's going to be the most beautiful print you've probably ever seen. And a lot of people don't realize that because they've just never actually seen it. Yeah, I just
So
wanted to
what
add
Colin, Colin, which printer do you have? Epson or Canon?
that. Epson, but you know.
Go on, buy Epson, everyone.
No, buy Canon. I don't care. I don't think it matters.
Really, no, it doesn't matter. I'm just joking.
And
We
then
have fun.
do y'all use Photoshop for or the printer to use color calibration when you go to print?
I personally like using Photoshop and Lightroom directly, but that's also, I mean, I made a video guide on how to do that, but that's going in through a lot of settings. The nice thing about using the printer program, which I have a lot of clients that use that, is you go in there, there's preset that you can just select and it will automatically apply the profile based on your paper and everything. So it's, you know, one half dozen of the other. I don't see the big difference between the two. Some prefer one versus the other. I mean, I'm, you know, Colin, what do you use?
I print out of Photoshop 100% of the time, even though you can print out of Lightroom and it has soft proofing and all that kind of stuff. I'm just used to Photoshop. I know the controls, I know where everything is, and I've been using it for so long. I know I'm going to get reliable results, so I always print out of Photoshop.
Then we had another question come in. So is it possible to totally match a BenQ that uses hardware calibration with an ASUS monitor, for example, that uses software calibration, or no?
Yes and no. Yes and no, depending on what color gamut can that do. Let's say you have a BenQ hardware SW that can do 99% Adobe RGB8 and ASUS can also do 99%. It might come close, but chances are it won't match exactly because you're probably talking about going down to the LCD panel that could be coming from a different fab. The other thing too is different hardware manufacturers will sometimes customize their own backlight for the display. And if they're using a backlight that's different, if they customize it differently, that's also going to cause the color to change a little bit in terms of the way how it's being reproduced. And one thing too is just pretty much the hardware on the display itself, the little circuit board that's built into these display, what they call like the scaler. Every company has their own hardware scaler or software hardware scaler they're using. They're all different, and that's going to produce colors and everything that are different, even though you have calibrated it. So you're going to get close, but you're never going to be an exact match. It's going to be rather difficult.
Awesome. Thank you, Art. And then Faroe asks, how can you calibrate a printer, in his case, the Epson Sure Color P900, that doesn't let him turn off the door management on the printer panel?
You say door management or
What is that?
color management? I think you meant to say color management. So
Okay,
here's
we'll
the
go
thing.
with that.
Okay, I
Yeah,
was confused with the door management was.
I can answer that question. Number one, you're probably using a Mac, and the first thing I would do is make sure you don't have an AirPrint driver. Mac will install the driver by default from Apple. That's called an AirPrint driver, and every time you use an AirPrint driver, it won't enable you to go and disable the color settings. What you have to do And especially with the latest Mac OS, which is Sequoia, it makes it very difficult now because in the past it used to say Epson P900 AirPrint. Now it doesn't say that. Now you have to go and inspect the printer first before it will tell you AirPrint. So most likely you have an AirPrint driver. So what you need to do is go into epson.com support, download the driver, install it, and then you need to remove your printer, re-add it again using the proper Epson driver. And then you can go through and disable color management because that's going to show the Epson print dialog. And we'll talk more with the printer that way. Let's see. So Jay asked a question. I was recently, oh wow, questions are coming in fast. I was recently advised to match the output appearance of my SW272U to my iPhone 15 Pro Max for comparison. How solid or weak is that advice? That's a very weak advice. You should never match anything to your phone. You have a display that costs as much as your phone. You should not be matching this to your phone. This is your reference display. However the phone's going to show, it's just going to show. You can't control that. And I would argue that if you go into an Apple store, just pull up the same picture on like the phones that I have on the table, even though they're the same model, they're going to look slightly different. Right? They're calibrated really well, but you can't go anything control that any further. And the other thing that I will also say too is that if you match your display to the iPhone 15 Pro Max, it won't match the 16. It won't match the 16 Pro Max. It won't match the 16 regular because they all use slightly different OLED backlight. And if you go back to like a few generations, whereas LCD only, it won't match those. It won't match Samsung display. You start to see where I'm going here. You're opening a large can of worms. Set this to where it is. Let those portable devices fall where they may.
And another thing I'll add to what you just said, if you have an iPhone or you have a MacBook Pro, stop right now, go into your settings and turn off True Tone because it's literally shifting your colors constantly. If you are never going to get color accuracy with that on, it's the worst thing that they could possibly have for professionals because it's literally changing the color all the time.
That's one of the best advice today. Let's see. I just received my BenQ PD 2730S 5K for my MacBook Pro and for Max. I shoot both photo and video and pull big prints once in a while. Would it be better off to add full Adobe RGB monitor, such as the SW, as a second monitor so I can see? It depends on where you print. If you have an inkjet printer at home, it might not be a bad idea, but you don't need it. You can just really go with the PD 2730S, which covers around like 80, it's in the high 80, low 90% Adobe RGB when you just calibrate it in P3 color gamut. So I would just leave that unless you feel the need that I need a secondary display. And if you do that, I think an SW might be a good choice for you to add in. So that would be, that's my thought on that one. Again, I'm not anywhere like advocating buying new hardware or anything like that. True Tone is in system settings display, and yeah, well, and that's on the Mac. But
it's under brightness. It's under display and brightness. I don't know if you can see that. I don't think it's focusing. I'll paint my face away. Is it? Can you see it? Display and brightness.
Yep, you can see.
Yep. Okay. And then you'll see down the bottom by brightness it says True Tone. Turn that off.
I was going to say, you can also do it from the control center. Just swipe down.
Oh, there we go. That's much easier. Okay.
On the display bar right there, and then there's like a True Tone option on the bottom there that you can just turn off. Is that middle button? That middle one? Bad. Turn it off.
All right. Anyone from Apple watching this, they're like, oh.
Also, if y'all have night shift turned on, like I do, but that's okay because I'm not a designer photographer on my phone. Turn that off as well. It'll tend your screen to be a little more reddish.
Yep.
All right. And then, so how much do you need to be worried about ambient light when soft proofing high-res PDFs for color on a BenQ monitor?
I would say you should be in a controlled environment. For the most part, you're going to be fine. I mean, if you have like a bright window with sunlight just coming in, get a curtain. Like that would definitely do a lot to help out in that regard. And I'm going to throw this at Colin again. Colin, anything to add?
No, I just have I have blinds in my room, and so it's never Right. If I'm not doing color work, I might, open up my blinds and let some sunlight in, because it's good for you.
Right.
But if I'm just sending emails and stuff, but as soon as I open Photoshop or I start doing any creative work or editing video or anything like that, immediately I lock down the room. But also, if you have the SW, you will have a hood on there too, which is actually going to help a little bit. I mean, that's not going to change the ambient light, the amount of ambient light in the room, but it is going to help with glare or sunlight hitting it or different lights kind of hitting the monitor from different angles. But also, it's nice. It also gets rid of reflections, because that's the other thing too. Is the color around. If you have like a brightly colored walls, that's actually going to affect your display. So if you have a hood, that will help protect from that as well. But that's another thing, is just kind of try to be in a room. You don't always have the option to do that, but if you do, and you're painting your walls, paint them in neutral color.
Also, the Nanomat panel that comes on these
Yep.
professional monitors also helps tremendously when it comes with working ambient lighting. Yeah, we'll show Art's.
That's a octabox. You don't really see that. This is pretty much diffusing the entire thing, so that helps out a lot too. Watch, I'm gonna loosen my display too much. I'm just kidding. It's not gonna happen.
I have the same one
also,
right here.
also, also another thing that I think would be neat is like because Colin was saying that when he launch an app, like he locks everything down. If you have home automation, you can press like a button and have it automatically close the curtain for you. You can even set like a watcher on your computer, so every time you launch like color aware app like Lightroom, Photoshop, whatever, it just automatically close everything for you.
Oh,
Turn
that's
the dim
pretty
down the
fancy.
light. You can do that.
Your
I'm just saying,
fortress.
this guy, yeah, your fortress. The sky is limit. You go into Photoshop mode, you're in lockdown mode.
Quick question from Michael. Seems BenQ has been releasing new models and updating their lineup. When are SWs going to be updated? No updates on the SW line as of now, but stay tuned. And then question from Jerry. So after calibrating the monitor, the hotkey puck is used to dim the brightness and indicates a percentage. What is the percentage of?
That percentage value is the percentage, not the max nit of the display, but it's the max nit for each of the color mode on the display. So each of even though this display, for example, let's say this one is max of 400 nit max brightness, the different color mode that you go in will have different brightness value, and that percentage, that 0 to 100, is based on each of those brightness. It's very hard to define. And it doesn't really give it to you report in nits, nor is that value. I don't believe it is linear. So I would not necessarily use that. I would just calibrate it. Let's say if you have, for instance, like a PD like this one, and let's say your value for the 80 nits is 37%. I would just know that number, that 37 is my number for my display. And if you want to turn it up brighter, by all means, you can use it in a brighter environment. You open the curtains, you're just watching a movie. It's all good. When you're ready to come do color critical work, just use that puck again, dial that down to the number that you have, which is, for instance, 37. And now you're back at the same spot where you are. So that's my advice on that one.
Awesome. Thank you, Art. And what is a good monitor for film editors from our lineup? If you need high refresh rate, I personally would recommend the PD3226G. It's the first 4K designer monitor that has a high refresh rate, 144 hertz. So if you do a lot of work in high refresh rate, or if you're an animator or an illustrator, it's good for you. But depending on your color space, I think any PD monitor would be great for you. Art, Colin, Andrew, if you guys have any recommendations for Ivan, please go ahead and let me know your experience.
So I would say SW or PD, if you're doing a lot of color critical work, hardware calibration may be better. I would probably say look at getting an SW line with hardware calibration. If you're not really doing super color critical work, you're not working like for Hollywood production house and so forth, I think PDs are fine. And majority of the PDs in the lineup is going to serve that purpose just perfectly fine without any problem in P3 color gamut. So you're going to be good there because all of these display covers, 100% Rec 709 anyway. So yeah.
And that's worth mentioning too that one of the modes is a Rec 709 as well on the monitors that you can set. Because on my Pucks, I set 3. I have I set Rec 709 and I check my video. And I don't always edit in Rec 709, but I do like to check it.
The question just came in from Ted relating to the topic. When calibrating my PD2730S, how do I select which color space is saved to calibration? Should I save it in P3 Rec 709 instead of Adobe RGB since monitor is not capable of Adobe RGB? So here's the thing. If you have that one and if you want to use Adobe RGB, there's no way for you to calibrate Adobe RGB. That's pretty much just a fundamental thing. And feel free to reach out to me if you have any more questions about that through my email. We can talk about that a little bit more. But essentially, if you're using Palette Master Ultimate software, it stores your calibration, whatever color profile you choose during that screen, in the user 1 or user 2 mode on the display. So there's 2 calibration slots that you have there, and it stores it there. Now, if you're using a third-party software, you would just select whatever mode you want to be in. For example, if you want to calibrate in P3, be in P3, calibrate there, and that's pretty much it. Remember that all PDs, they're a software calibrated display, meaning that they'll have a ICC profile on the computer, but the computer doesn't really talk with the display to adjust like the hardware chip on the inside. On the SW though, you do have that capability. So hopefully that answers that question. But again, I'm sure there may be some follow-up question, but feel free to follow up with an email. I think that might be a better thing for us to have a one-on-one discussion about that.
Okay. Question from Faro. How do you read spot color values off monitor and prints using the i1 Pro Plus 3?
So i1 Pro Plus 3 uses the X-Rite i1 Profiler software, and i1 Profiler software, there should be a place where you do spot coloring. And that one that pretty much will tell you to put the color spectrophotometer either on the display to read a color, or it would actually tell you to like put it on whatever object that is. Let's say I want to know what white this Apple Magic trackpad is. I can hover over here, put the probe on here, and it will actually it will read that value and give me like a value feedback. So you can certainly do it that way. That would probably be the best way to do it. If you do have any more questions about like how to go about that, and if it's not in the software, again, this is one of those I probably would just send me an email so I can look into it further. But I've done some testing with that, and you can just do spot color that way.
Awesome. Thank you all. Question from George. So my photographs from Nikon Z9 and Z7 developed in Lightroom Classic appear very noisy and grainy when displayed full screen on my new PD3225U. You guys have any idea what may be causing this?
I could
Variables.
joke about it, and it might be maybe this is the
Colin, go
first time you've ever had a quality display, and so the photos are noisy already, and you just didn't notice it because you're, and that's, that it's joking, but it's also serious, because generally speaking, if your images are noisy and grainy, it's probably the settings on your camera, like maybe your ISO is too high, for the exposure, for what you're shooting in, like maybe you're shooting in low light, or maybe you're shooting too dark. So I would check the settings on your camera, like maybe open up your aperture a little bit more, maybe slow down your shutter speed a little bit more. There's other ways to mitigate noise when you're shooting, but I'm going to say that the noise is already there and you're just seeing it for the first time. What do you think? Or you look like you want
What
to say
Colin said. That's exactly what I would do. Oh, and the other thing that you can do if you want to fix it, just right click on it and say enhance and do the do the AI denoising in Lightroom. It works really well. There you go. That's problem solved right there. Hey, it does an amazing job.
Lightroom has great noise reduction. It does.
And
Finally,
it's
taken years to get good noise reduction.
Yeah, but it still keeps your file as raw as a DNG. That's like the best thing ever.
Definitely.
There's a question kind of somewhat related to this. Let's see, from Jay that came in. Is there a proper, correct procedure in print available to walk one through the calibration process for 272U? I would email me and I will send you the email or a link to my video that I've done calibrating SW display. Just essentially just set it to, like I said before, Adobe RGB, choose the right brightness, and you're pretty much good to go.
Awesome. And then another question from Jay, in regards to using HDR mode on his SW272U in color spaces. He just purchased and installed in the system and wanted to know if you guys had any tips around using HDR mode.
Depending on if you're on a Mac or a PC, how you use it and which program you use it, it's HDR is right now the Wild West. And I would also go as far as saying that even though these are HDR capable, they're not necessarily the best HDR displays that you can get out there. There are many others that have higher nits that would be a better representation for HDR. But if you want to use it, you can certainly turn that on in Mac. So Mac handle HDR through the operating system. That means you have to enable it directly from the OS, and it from that point on, it just takes over everything. Windows does it almost like by application, where certain application can request access to HDR function if it was coded that way, which Adobe software are. So you can say HDR capable and turn that on in display setting, and you can go about that way. It's a fairly broad question that needs a lot more specificity for your setup. So if you have any more questions about that, again, I hate to defer to email, but this is, I don't have a chance to have like you as a live audience where we can go back and forth a little bit more. So that would be my advice. It's just to kind of like write down what you have, what you're trying to achieve, and send me an email. And if I have a solution, I will try to my best to get back to you with, some clever ideas on how to approach that.
Awesome. Thank you, Art. And then Nina was wondering, best monitor settings for a photo editor whose wedding photographers do not calibrate. They currently suggest using P3 preset, but they wanted to get y'all's input as well.
Shout out to Nina. I think you're the same Nina that we've been in touch with for a long time, like chatting back and forth. Awesome. Glad that you asked the question. I'm hoping you're here in the attendance too. But anyway, for that, you can just use it at P3. That's perfectly fine. The other thing too is just cap everything at sRGB, which is sad, but it's again one of those lowest common denominator. This works throughout right now. The sad reality of where we live in right now is that even though majority of our display devices can show P3, P3 is still not the standard color gamut for displays yet in by the ICC standard, and they haven't updated that yet. So majority of a standard right now that we're still using for web is still sRGB. That has been updated to P3. That's, and in my conversation with people that are involved with the organization, they were saying that's going to come at some point, and we keep waiting. So that's kind of where we're at. I think the moment we have that big push to say that web color standard is now going to be P3, I think there's going to be a whole bunch of people, labs, everything that needs to start to accommodate that. But until that happens, that's not going to be one of those like big things. So I would say either keep it in P3, you can work in that, or if you really want to just be safe on everything, then just go sRGB, because you can't really go wrong with sRGB. With P3, there's like different percentage coverage on different display. And if they use something that has P3 coverage but only shows 80%, I mean, they're missing out on a few things there. But if you just do sRGB, then you're pretty much good.
That's a good way of putting it, as the lowest common denominator. Yeah, so I actually had a question going back to the denoising uh, in Photoshop and Lightroom. I want to see if there are any other AI tools that Adobe currently has in Photoshop or Lightroom that you guys use to enhance your work, whether it be generative AI or if there's anything else that they've recently come out with in the beta that you guys may have seen a lot of benefits from.
I mean, good
Oh,
one for Andrew
Richie,
to answer.
open a can of worms.
It's what?
Andrew you use a lot of AI, don't you, Andrew?
Yeah, I was going to say, separate from Adobe, Topaz Photo AI is pretty good for not only for upscaling and bringing out detail and definition, but it's also good for noise. So it's pretty good. In fact, I've been trying to talk to Rocky at Adobe about implementing, Topaz Photo AI's upscaling abilities to make that more of like an Adobe function, so I don't have to subscribe to Topaz anymore. Keep it all in Adobe, So
They corner us anyway, so we're good.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of, there's a lot of tools, and it's definitely progressing very quickly, when it comes to, like AI. It's like every tool has AI.
Hmm.
But you still got to be careful because you can't just throw AI at everything. Particularly, if you're working journalism or you're entering photo contests, there's a lot of places where you're not allowed to use AI.
Right.
So be aware of that too. And also, when you're taking a photo on a camera, like such as an iPhone or even the Google Pixel, what you're looking at is not the photograph. What it's doing
Yep.
is it's taking many photographs and then it's actually generating an AI image out of all those photographs. That's why when you zoom in really big, it looks really weird. So yeah, so just be aware of that.
Sure. Good point.
Oh, and one more thing that's a big pet peeve of mine that I ask if you ask questions about AI, be very specific about what AI you're talking about. It's like, is it Gen AI? Is it AI noise reduction? AI is such a broad term.
True.
It's like, oh God,
Yeah.
it can mean so many different things. Are you talking about the AI autofocusing, for example, in like a Sony camera? Like, just be
Yeah.
specific about which AI you're referring to, because
And
that
if
helps
it's
a
using
lot.
Sensei, yeah, you're right. Yeah.
Exactly.
Like if it's using Sensei in Photoshop, that's fine. I mean, that's not creating an AI image. It's just using the intelligence to help with selections and different things like that. So that's
Wait,
not actually going
Sensei's
to
still
turn your
around?
image into an AI image. What's that?
Sensei's still around?
Oh yeah, yeah. Sensei is like at the core of most of the tools that don't have that little sparkling logo on it.
Oh, gotcha, gotcha.
Yeah, all right. And Andrew, since you work with so many tools for AI in your workflow, what do you think creators misunderstand the most when it comes to using AI tools in your work?
Misunderstand. Um, well, if they're creating like say, digital art or AI art, the one thing I would say is just try to, um, and this is my personal opinion, but I would say get away from, the cliches of AI art. So, I mean, it might be more valid to go into the different, Leonardo, Midjourney, Adobe Firefly, and create multiple images and then composite them to create something that's more authentic and, original than to kind of create certain things that hundreds or thousands of people are creating. So, you know, and just one thing, a mistake that people make too is you don't, the way that they keep developing AI, you don't really have to work so hard either. Like when it comes to even the prompts themselves, remember that you can use AI to create AI. So you can go to, Perplexity or, now Gemini, Chat GPT, and you can say, give me a series of descriptive text descriptions to create generative AI in the theme of, surrealism or whatnot. And it can give you a lot of starting points or, very descriptive sentences that you can take and then you can just tweak to make them a more personal. But you don't have to kind of like bang your head against the wall and come up with like a lot of descriptive text. You can start with AI search engines first.
Let me also add too that if you're not following Andrew, you should, because he's always posting these amazing work, and I'm always astonished by them. And then when he told me that he's using what he just told you guys, using AI to generate AI, to me, and I never thought about that. And he does that so fluidly. You should definitely follow him. His work, his fine artwork is really amazing.
Thank you. I would say that it's another good way of approaching it too is to not stay in one lane as such. So for me, a lot of times I will create images with Leonardo AI, but then bring them into Adobe Firefly to do the video. So I can animate the video with a, and that way I found out that it will take the image and give it a bit more depth than an original Adobe Firefly image. I do think that the new Adobe Firefly 4 model is much better than it's been. It's more detailed, more realistic in ways. But I think that Leonardo still excels. I've seen stuff with, I run the AI art and digital art group, and I've seen stuff with Leonardo and Midjourney that's just incredible. I mean, some of it is so crazy, surreal, detailed. It's freaky. um, and I think it's good to utilize something that has so much detail to then take into another app and let it use its strengths,
So let me follow up for Andrew for a question. So for a noob like me who haven't used Leonardo or Midjourney, are those free? Can I just go in and use them, or do I have to, like, is there a subscription?
Right. So with Midjourney, I never got that into because it seemed like you had to there was something about it that where you had to kind of take the code and go into some other world
Oh,
with
right.
it. It wasn't very direct. And so I kind of let it, move towards Leonardo more naturally. And then yes, with Leonardo, you can have a certain amount of, credits that you get per day, and then you can
Mm.
do certain things. Obviously, be aware though that where everyone's going with all the AI, art sites, is they're all moving towards video. And just be aware that when you start doing video, it takes, instead of say 50 credits, it takes 250 to 300 credits. So just be aware that, if you're not going to do a paid plan, you might be going through your daily credits pretty fast. But that is a good question, because my advice would be is if you're jumping into AI art, and you want to, just kind of feel it through before subscribing to anything, play around with the free options that they give you and find out which one kind of resonates with your style. So for me, I really like the kind of look and aesthetic sensibility of Leonardo. Whereas, as an example, I was doing, say, Microsoft's image creator from Designer. And no matter how descriptive I would get with the text prompts, the images would always kind of look the same. They had a very same aesthetic. And I just felt like I was trapped in it. Like I didn't feel like I could branch out and go to another level. So I stopped using that more and then paid for a subscription to Leonardo. But you might like I said, you have to kind of feel out what your style is. So if you like the look of another one that's coming out, that's been out, that's getting better is Krea. So there's Krea, Leonardo, Midjourney, and there's Microsoft Image Creator from Designer. There's Adobe Firefly, which is getting better as well and has video capabilities. But yeah, feel them out and go with what feels right for you. And don't forget Photoshop. I mean, you can always create different images in these AI apps and then go back and then use the power of layer masking and compositing and make something truly authentic instead of being limited by what the AI gives you. Right,
It
Colin?
worth mentioning. Oh, sorry, I was just going to mention there on Midjourney, because that's probably the third-party one I use the most. It used to be you had to go in Discord, and but now they have a UI on the website, so you don't have to go to Discord anymore.
Can you put in direct text prompts and then it generates, or do you have
Yeah.
to kind of?
Yeah, you can do that now. Yeah, it's come a long way from where it was.
Okay, good.
Awesome. All right. So we have time for just a couple more questions. So Mike asks, what is the expected lifetime, approximate hours for BenQ AQCOLOR monitors to maintain the full sRGB gamut?
So the gamma doesn't diminish over time. It's not so we can't think of display as, for example, a color patch that we leave in the sun and it fades over time. That's not necessarily the case. Most of the time the LCD can maintain that gamut. It's the backlight that's going to get weaker and weaker over time, because that's the thing that's, lighting up the LCD. LCD itself have power going into it, but it doesn't light its own pixels. It's the backlight that's going to dim, but that's part of the reason why you constantly recalibrate every 4 to 8 weeks or so, and that mitigates all those things from happening, so it keeps the baseline the same. When it fails would be when the backlight's no longer working adequately. For example, I have people that have 6, 7 year old BenQ display that are just like, I can't calibrate. I can't get the luminance right. It's only showing like 40 or 50 or 60 nits and it's too dark for me to use, I mean, that's when the backlight is really starting to die. So that's when you probably would consider getting a new one or a replacement display.
And then, do you guys have any recommended monitor and Lightroom settings after calibration and ICC paper profiles to obtain consistent monitor and print appearances?
Just do full color management and full profiling. I mean, if you print directly from Lightroom, you print using a paper with profile and provide the heads are not clogged, you should be good to go. You know, and the right driver, obviously, not AirPrint, like we talked about way earlier in this program. Oh, Apple, they know how to get you.
And then, question from Pam. Do y'all know the correct way to apply lookup tables to get consistent results?
Where?
Where, yeah. In
Um,
Photoshop and Premiere and Lightroom. Actually,
we,
can't
we
I
can we
sort
can
of can in
assume
Lightroom.
Photoshop or Lightroom.
Yeah. Premiere Pro, by the way, if you're talking about video, I don't know if you're aware, but they've added some new color management features in there where you don't have to load in lights anymore. It can actually do all of that for you now.
Nice.
It's really cool stuff. I mean, we don't have time to look at it right now, but I would definitely check it out. I was looking at it at NAB recently, and Carl, I don't know if you guys know Carl from Adobe, was like demonstrating. It's incredible because it has all this footage and it can literally interpret it now, and you don't have to apply LUTs to every single log footage anymore.
And then, all right, question from Samuel. Can you daisy chain BenQ monitors from Thunderbolt 3 to Thunderbolt 4?
You can, as long as they're Thunderbolt and they're capable of daisy chain, you can certainly daisy chain them. There's not a problem. You
Yeah, the
can't.
thing
You
I'd add. Oh,
can
sorry.
only,
Go, no.
oh, I was gonna say you can only daisy chain like 2 displays. So if I have this one and I want a daisy chain, I can only do one more. Just because you have Thunderbolt, it doesn't mean you can put like 20 displays and keep daisy chaining one of each other. It's like it's the initial connection bandwidth that is the limitation. But Colin, go ahead, please.
No, I was just going to say, just a tip is, if you've got Thunderbolt 3 and Thunderbolt 4, make sure you put the Thunderbolt 4 closest to the device, because it's, the speed is going to be limited to the slowest common denominator. So if you're like putting Thunderbolt 3, then Thunderbolt 4, and then you're plugging your laptop into it, you're not going to get the full speed.
Man, that word keeps coming up. Common denominator today.
Then we had a question coming from Jerry. So he heard that Leisha and Nikon are working on installing a micro QR code to prove the image is not an AI image. Will this also show if AI has been used on the image? Is this something you guys are familiar with?
I've heard of
So
a lot of hardware manufacturers are building in, the authentication into their systems.
okay.
There's a lot of
Content
them. Some
credentials.
of them you know, I don't want to say the names of them because I don't know how NDA some of the stuff is, but it's definitely, with the CIA, a content authenticity initiative,
Yes.
there's a lot
Yeah.
of companies, thousands of companies now in partnership with that. So, there's a fingerprint being left in many, many different areas, but like you were going to say something there.
Oh, I was gonna say, like, if you use AI or if anything that's related to AI is used in Photoshop, it shows up in the metadata of your file, even though you flatten it or whatever, or you try to strip it, it still shows up. So there's ways to prove that AI was used.
Yeah. Yeah. And so it's being
Personally,
built into the hardware now as well as the software. Yeah.
yeah.
Question from Gennaro. So how do you integrate paper color sync into Lightroom and Photoshop workflows?
Best way to do it is to just turn on paper color sync using the software thing, specify the printer, the paper that you want to print with, or approximate the paper that you want to use, come as close as possible. When you're in Lightroom, just simply set I would probably do soft proofing based on the paper profile, and that gets you really close to where you need to be if you want to use paper color sync. If you're more advanced, I would go in and tell you to just calibrate your display to D50. have a D50 or D55 light just lamp next to you, and you can do it that way too if you want to use it. That's essentially what Paper Color Sync is doing. It just simplifies the process a little bit, but you can certainly manually go about and do it that way too.
Awesome. And then a couple questions from Thomas. When do you find lab color mode to be most useful?
So lab color is something, I'll be honest, I used it more before we had Camera Raw and we had some of the settings that are in Camera Raw now. So lab color is really good for separating color from luminosity. So that's basically what it does is it creates 3 channels. You get a luminance channel, which is your black and white information, and then you get 2 color channels. So it's great if you want to do some work on the color, but you don't want to touch the luminosity, or you want to sharpen the luminosity, but you don't want to increase, the color noise or whatever you're doing. There's a lot of different things you could do. And one of the tricks that, Dan Margalis, had, he did a book, Canyon Conundrum. And one of the big things he would do is he would convert it to lab, throw it in, and then apply a curve to the colors to bring out more color without just nucleizing the image. There's a new word, nucleizing. But I feel like since, we've got things like dehaze, we've got things like texture and and to a lesser extent clarity. I don't use clarity as much inside of Lightroom. I don't feel like I necessarily need to go into a lab as much, if at all, anymore, because a lot of the time I feel like I can do the same kind of thing. But also if you're doing adjustments in Photoshop, like say you're sharpening and you don't want to affect the color, you just choose fade and then you just change the blend mode to color blend mode or luminance blend mode. So you can easily, undo the luminosity and just have the color applied, or you can just have the luminance applied and not the color. So you can do it in Photoshop. I'm sure, there's still places when you have those really, really tough images, like maybe scan film, the old faded film, where lab mode could be used to kind of punch it without bringing too many artifacts and too many issues back into the picture. That would be my thought about it. Yeah.
Good.
Then how do you apply color psychology into your work?
So my background was a graphic designer, print designer. So one of the things I learned about I was very, very fortunate. I had a mentor who always asked me why. So whenever I added anything, looks cool was never a good enough reason. So whenever I did anything, he would look at it and say, why did you choose this color? Why did you choose this shape? What and he did it on purpose to make me think. This is a guy, Dr. Jerry Jensen. He had 3 doctorates, very, very smart guy. But when I was a junior, young graphic designer, I was so nervous in his presence. But I'm better for it. So color psychology is everything has a reason, and everything has a meaning, everything has a feeling. There's a reason they use orange in fast food, because orange makes you hungry. There's different, like green means new, means fresh, black can mean classy, red can mean danger, but can also mean sexy. So there's different meanings behind different colors. So I think it's really important to think about that. And maybe you could be shifting some colors in Photoshop to reinforce that message. Or, better still, you should be thinking about that in pre-production. So if you're going to be doing photography, thinking about the colors, not just grabbing random colors, but actually thinking about what do these colors mean, and also being aware that some of these have different meanings in different cultures. So some things could be offensive in another culture. So, it's important to be aware of those kind of things. So that's probably what I would say. Yeah, because it just reinforces, everything tells a story. And everything is that, like at anything Disney don't just grab colors randomly. They're thinking about what those colors mean. So yeah, I would think about it. And it's an interesting study. If you're not familiar with that, it's a really interesting study, because I actually found really fascinating, like blue, for water, for new, even green could be new too, but blue could also be new. Each color has a meaning, and it's really fascinating to look at it up.
Cool. You're muted.
Yes, I was. Good catch, everyone. Making sure you're paying attention. So one more question from Thomas. Do you have a favorite formula for rich blacks?
And I'm going to take that one because we talked about that. So he's referring to CMYK printing. So when you're, if you're working in RGB, it doesn't matter. You're just going to grab black if you're working or you're doing digital. But if you're printing, then it does matter because when you do the color separations, each of the plates, well, I guess we go DTP now, but each one of those is going to, so when they lay down the color, like generally CMYK is cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. And then these little dots are printed in these 4 colors. And then they're printed at different patterns and different sizes. And then when you pull it away from your eye, you see color because it blends together. That's how they print color. But each of those plates has a certain amount of color is coming from the cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. And so that's a very good question, because if you don't use enough, if you just go, no cyan, magenta, or yellow, and you just use black, it's going to be kind of gray. It's not necessarily going to be a good deep black, a solid black. And then the other side is if you just go 100 on everything, then it can be too much and it can start to bleed off and you're not going to get your crisp edges. So the consensus, I would probably go with the consensus, which most, people do, is 60, 40, 40, 100. So that's 60 cyan, and then 40% magenta, 40% yellow, and then 100% black is pretty much the standard. And that gives you a good balance, gives you good solid blacks without it being too dense. Or it looks like someone else was saying a 40, 30, 30, 100. It's probably a good one too. Yeah, Hannah. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Thank you all for the questions. Thank you, Art, Andrew, and Colin, for answering these in such great detail. So I think that's gonna wrap up the webinar. So on behalf of BenQ AQCOLOR, we want to thank you, everyone, for spending time with us today. I know there's 100 more entertaining ways to spend your Friday afternoon, so thank you for spending it with us. Special thanks to our incredible ambassadors, Art, Colin, and Andrew, once again, for sharing your insights, experiences, and expert tips. I will drop the email for any webinar-related questions if we didn't get to yours, or if you have any follow-up questions that pop in your head at like 10 p.m. when you're laying in bed, go ahead and shoot that question over to us and we'll do our best to answer it. So yeah, again, thank you everyone for attending. Stay tuned for upcoming webinars and events, and we look forward to seeing you all next time.